I wanted to do something where we talked about, and I've been thinking about this issue a lot lately, but product design and how designers operate in a space is product design versus how we operate in an agency. And I've worked like in-house, and I think in-house has a lot of similarities to product design. Just in terms of how teams are structured, how they're organized, how everything kind of flows from a creative standpoint. And really what I wanted to do was kind of think about those two facilities, and maybe we'll have some debate about it. I would love to hear everybody's opinion here on what they think, but I'll give you like the 2 seconds on me. So I've been running an agency for about 10 years now. Prior to that, I was with another agency here in town and grew them from about 8 people to about 60, 70 when I left, part of Struck, if you guys are familiar with Struck, downtown. And I left Struck with the goal of focusing on digital. Myself and my business partner are really, really focused on what it means to create and build out amazing, immersive, creative storytelling experiences in digital. It didn't start that way. It started with lots of banners and like junk like that from back in the day, as you guys probably may or may not be familiar with that kind of work. And as we've evolved, we work more and more on the storytelling side, and so that's actually caused us to do a lot more video work and a lot more content work as of late. And so that's probably one of the bigger distinct differences that I see, at least in terms of creative. And I'll give you like, just so everybody has a super quick background, I'll show you guys kind of what we do. A lot more digital stuff than that, but like we've been focused on building the content reel out as of late. Alright.
Coffee faces threats because its agricultural crop is grown in difficult remote areas by small breeders. It faces threats.
Thanks, Leo. Okay, thank you. All right, so for questions today, if you guys want to fire off questions or if you have questions as we're going through stuff, you can, I think we'll be able to aggregate these kind of at the end or something, just if you think of stuff while we're going. I had put it out there to the world earlier today if anybody wants to ask some questions around what we're talking about. You can use the hashtag WLSHookup, or you can just ask. We're pretty small in here. All right, so my title is Hooking Up versus Monogamy. And I kind of think this is a hilarious title. I'm probably the only one who's laughing. And I like this title because this is really, it kind of is maybe a little bit of a crass way for me to look at the difference between in-house designers and agency designers. Those of us in agency world, we're always hooking up. We're looking for the next gig. We're like strolling the bars, like, hey, are you a new client? Cool, because I can do something really special for you. Monogamy is this more dedicated thing that goes through these like serious iterations and evolutions, and we step from thing to thing to thing, and we iterate constantly, right? Just like we do in our personal relationships. And I think that is a great summary for me of how I think about creative in these two types of organizations, and we have a lot to learn from each other. On my end, I can never seem to get enough time or money to do the project I want, and I think from everyone I've ever talked to on the product design side, they can never seem to get enough variety to keep innovating and keep creating, because they're just thinking about the same thing all day long. And I would love for you guys to challenge me on that as we get into it. So I wanted to build out kind of some points of what I think are important to both types of creatives, and kind of get at the heart of that and talk about that a little bit. So step one is like, being a great creative in both requires you to have an opinion, right? And to express that opinion. I think opinions in general, we've all heard that saying, right? Everybody has one. But I think one of the things that as a design leader that we need to do is make sure that we're giving those opinions in a really positive, engaging way to our staff. How many of you guys are, I guess, let me start by asking this, how many people here are like creative or in creative leadership? Ish. What does everybody do? Somebody tell me. What do you guys do?
Design.
Your design?
Graphic design.
Graphic design. Anybody else?
UX.
UX. And you guys are kind of mid-level, junior level, kind of just starting out? Cool. So I'll talk a lot about what you guys can all tell people above you that they need to do to improve your creative departments then. I think one of the things that is important, and even as a mid-level designer, it's have that opinion, right? Because that shows that leadership ability. Now, interestingly, when you have an opinion, you shouldn't always answer for everyone around you. And I found this out kind of the hard way. But I think for many years, I like to micromanage my staff. Yeah, go for it.
I have an hard time hearing.
Oh, I can turn that. Is that better? Oh, wait.
I just don't like it because I can hear the feedback back there, and then I have to listen to my own voice. But I guess that's probably a little quieter too for me. So I love this quote here by Liz Wiseman. If a leader holds the assumption that it is the leader's role to provide the answers, and if employees resign themselves in this mode of business, a downward know-it-all spiral naturally follows. And I think for many years that's what I found myself in. It's like I'm telling my employees how they should think and what their opinion should be. And we didn't learn to collaborate. And so, yes, have an opinion, but you need to learn how to get everybody invested in that opinion. That's a really important factor. As you can see, I think the last part's great. It's third, the subordinates act on the leader's answers. So you have this vicious cycle when it comes to it. So I think as a designer, you need to be a little controversial. I think that's important. This kind of goes with having an opinion. And I think a good one here, I'm going to tell everybody here that I don't really believe in the term product designer. I kind of hate that term. I hate UI designer, I hate UX designer, I hate IA designer, all of those things. And so that's my controversy for everybody here. That probably makes everybody angry. I feel like we're all designers, we're all problem solvers. And I think there's some irony in this, right? Because we're creating, our job as a UX designer, let's say, is to create and boil down an interface to the simplest format for people to use. Yet we've created this term in this idea of product designer that actually obfuscates everything, right? It's wait, do you make shoes or do you make software? What is it? And so I find that to be kind of funny and ironic. But, so my opinion may be controversial here, and I think that's a good thing. This is my son. He can be controversial at times. And please nobody take a photo of that, because then we'd all be in trouble.
It's going on YouTube.
Don't YouTube it. Oh, that's going on YouTube? We can block that out. It's okay.
I'll edit that out.
It's okay. Don't worry about it. He'll regret it when he's 16 and I have to, and he's trying to date, but forget about that. Know your history. So as a designer, I think this is really important, and as a creative, I think this is really important in all organizations, right? So like, we know that we need to read Milton Glaser, but I think the most appropriate book here in this room is The Design of Everyday Things. If you guys have not read that book, that is like the fundamentals of how industrial design came to be. A fantastic book that applies to us very, very directly. And if you came to this career maybe through development or through a different industry, because I think in today's day and age, we're all coming to design and to digital design specifically from very different places. This is a classic graphic design book. Read that book. And since this is going to be on the internet, you can all reference that slide later on. So I won't read them all. Collaboration versus isolation. This is really, really interesting one for me, and I'm still learning here. So this is an area where I think this says a lot about how our teams are divided, right? So in my studio, everything's very, very collaborative. And in many product designers that I speak with, they feel very isolated. They might be one person sitting a software team. I think some organizations, everyone is sitting together. But I think that this is a common problem that's kind of multidimensional. So like, how often are you getting together with your groups? How often are you meeting? And then how much time do you have to work alone? Our studio has been really, really challenged in this front. Our old building was this big open space, and nobody had any place to like privately work together. And we've been working really hard to kind of create like these spaces, right? This is like super hyped out in Silicon Valley now. Like create like little workspaces for everyone to go into and talk. And we're finding that that's working better. But you'll often see people think it's super weird. They walk into our studio and they're like, why is it so quiet? And there's like 30 people sitting in a room, right? But everybody's got their headphones on. They're all like, secretly they put themselves in their own cubicles. And I don't have an answer for this. I have no idea what the best methodology is. So again, I'm super curious to hear what everybody here thinks. Okay, so this is a quote from Julie Zhu, who's the product designer at Facebook. And the graph of impact tends to correlate with how many people you need to work effectively with. Once I realized this, I started to see my interactions with other people differently. It was no longer about winning battles and proving that I was right, but about developing stronger collaborative relationships. And I think there's this theory of like a 2x multiplier when we talk about relationships and design. If I walk into a room and I try to sell something to someone, there's a lot of days where if they don't know me personally and they're not invested in me, selling that thing is really hard. But if you've established that relationship, and this goes for me as an external, like dealing with an external client, or anyone here who's dealing with a higher up, a VP, who's looking at your design and evaluating it, you need to try and create that personal relationship no matter what you do. It adds instant credibility to your design. And then there's also kind of evolves from this idea of collaboration of you don't earn a leadership position with your headphones on. I love that. And in my studio, but you might just get to keep it, because if you're sitting in meetings all day at an agency, you're not getting anything done. All right, so I wanted to show you guys what our space looks like really quickly. It doesn't look like that anymore, but that's what it looked like when we first got it. And so we worked really hard to create these like common spaces. And I don't have a photo of one of our small meeting rooms, but now we have this is like one of our bigger meeting rooms. But we've created like some intimate spaces, like 3 different offices that are project-based. So when we go to work on a particular project, we have a focus space around that area. So like our team, if they're going to work on, let's say like Starbucks, like they have a full kind of area that's devoted to that like has all of the current working process docs and stuff up on the walls. And I found that that's been really effective because we can be away for 3-4 days. We can walk into that room and we can say, oh, what's going on with this particular project if it's a larger project. I'm sure meeting room space is tough down here though, or your companies. So as a creative, I think it's important on both sides to make people happy, right? Like, what is the model of how we make people happy? Like, are we just coming to work every day, or are we trying to create a family environment? And in our studio, that's really important. The family environment is super important. Like, thinking beyond just like, these guys are my coworkers, and trying to like pull some weight for them and help them out whenever you can. That's a really simple one that everyone can do. But I have a question. Should we be a family? Is that good? Is it too... I've been reading lately that a lot of people feel that if you come to work in a environment where everything feels like a family, that what happens there is people don't pull their weight. They kind of get locked into their roles, and they don't necessarily reflect on that. And I think one of the things our team has been specifically trying to do is get together and like actually talk through that, communicate through that, and say like, hey, hold people accountable, no matter what your level. Even if you're a junior, hold me accountable for not doing my job. It's kind of that idea of like the 360 interview process. So we work really hard to create an environment of respect. And so the key to building kind of design departments, in my opinion, is to kind of, one, you have to hire carefully, right? You have to kind of nurture those people thoughtfully. And then my role is to listen to them really passionately. And I think that really creates an environment that everyone respects each other. And so I'm gonna give you guys an example of an outside client and where this was really kind of amusing. So we recently did the Trib site, Salt Lake Tribune, which I don't think anybody, maybe a few of you maybe know that, but it's doubtful because it's been kind of almost a white label project. And it was really amusing because I got to watch this play out in an external organization. The Tribune is made up of 2 groups. They're made up of journalists who think very much about how do I get the best story out there. And they're made up of ad guys who think, how do I make sure that those journalists can come to work every day and keep them paid? And the 2 coexist in a horrendous, like, kind of split decision kind of thing. It's like they're constantly battling each other. And I almost believe that there are people on their advertising department who could have built a great site for them, but they had to come to us to actually be the mediators. It's kind of funny in retrospect. And so really kind of it comes back to this idea of creating an environment of respect. And that's what we attempted to do for both of those teams. We tried to bring them together, make sure everybody understood, and balance out, like, here's how much journalism you need to here's how much advertising you need. And we are in the very fortunate position of having some expertise in that area and not like watching those 2 battle it out like 2 kids on a playground that wanted to fight each other, which kind of did happen at times. So this is like some of the work that we did. If you guys are interested, check out the site. Definitely check it out on mobile. I think we did a good job like reinvigorating it on mobile. It was pretty old school before. It didn't work very well on other systems, but I'm pretty happy with the outcome, and I think it's proven to be pretty good for them too. So this is a tip for me that I love. This is nothing to do usually with design, but it's this fast is slow, slow is fast. So I'm like a really nerdy biker, and I think about biking a lot, like way too much. And this was a quote that's always talked about in the cycling world, and it has to do with like entering and exiting a turn, let's say. You're coming into a turn, don't come in absolutely as fast as you can and then hit the brakes in the middle of the turn and then pedal up really hard to exit that turn. Usually you want to just be smooth through the whole thing. And kind of the equivalent of this in the agency world and in the design world has very much to do with kind of what I was speaking about before. I think agency is fast, and I think product and internal marketing tends to be slow. And again, we have a lot to learn from each other. And I think sometimes, like in our world, like, man, we oftentimes don't have enough time to do our projects. That may be true. I saw you shaking your head. Do you have a comment?
I'm not just saying, really fast at our place.
Do you?
Yeah.
That's good. Are you iterating or are you creating all new from scratch? Iterating.
Yeah.
So you have a basis to work from, right? Most of the time when I walk into a project, I have no basis. I have nothing. I'm maybe a style guy if I'm lucky.
Yeah.
And so you're like ground up creating every time, and it can be taxing at times. So you have to like learn over this long period of time. Are you getting faster though as you iterate? Yeah. All right, I want to hear from you later. We'll talk about it more for sure. Yeah, I kind of talk about, like, I feel like agency life is like, it's like ADD. I feel like I'm always like rushing around. And so one thing that I found that was kind of funny, I like this analogy of like, we're either farmers or hunters. Has anybody heard this? So yeah, so we're either farmers, we either like love constraints and feel lost without them, we like enjoy slogging through kind of existing products to find a more refined design solution. We thrive on kind of iteration and refinement. So I'd say like most UI, UX guys, like they're farmers, like they kind of like, they like those constraints and they like it. The shared knowledge that just came through history. Me, I feel very much like this guy. Excited by freedom to wander, too many constraints to deplete their energy, comfortable with uncertainty and unfamiliar territory, thrive on new products and redesigns. So in some organizations, like I've talked to people at Facebook before, and they're very much like always creating a new product over there. Like a lot of their designers are like constantly move from product to product to product. But I think many of the people that I've talked to here in the Valley, like not quite so much. Like they're working on one product and they're kind of trying to roll that out. And I think that I just love this analogy, quite honestly. This idea of farming and hunting and what we can learn from each other. So this one's kind of a tip that has more to do with, this is a little more general in terms of like a hiring thing and people that you want to work with. So sometimes it's like building consensus and finding people in your organization to work with, but look for those people with grit, right? You guys have all heard this term, like it's like this ability to kind of overcome adversity, right? This ability to find people that really can dig in and endure things for the long haul. And we look for those same kind of people. And I think it's wonderful when you find them. I think it's even more wonderful when you develop people that can actually have that grit in an organization. And this is actually a little bit about, I guess it's the psychologist Angela Lee Duckworth who actually came up with that terminology. And grit's more than just perseverance. Duckworth ties grit to a focus on a long-term goal and a commitment to following through on them. Candidates who've overcome adversity over a long period of time because they can see the payoff are gritty and usually be good great hires. So if anybody here's hiring, there's your tip. Stand-ups and driving discussion. Let's see. Oh, sorry. So I think that the important thing about kind of stand-ups, and our team tries to do these once a day, is that we all get on the same page in the design department. I think we often don't know what the other people in our design department are doing, and I think it allows us to create more open channels of communication and kind of jump in and work together on things. I very much view kind of the leadership job on this side as challenging people to kind of expand their thinking process and expand their working process. So jumping in with people that maybe like they're not as busy, you need to go over here and just like spend an hour with them, even if it doesn't result in a product. Like, don't really care if it doesn't result in design or anything. Like, just spend an hour trying to learn what challenge they're trying to solve and offer insight. Everybody familiar with this phrase? You guys heard this? Okay, so I'll talk really quickly about what this means to me. This is a Picasso phrase, if you didn't know. Good artists copy, great artists steal. I feel like everybody puts this in their slide presentation too. This is like the thing I most tell my young designers, because it's something where you need to know all of the things that have been done before so that you can make the new thing, right? Like, we don't design through epiphany. I don't sit down at a desk and go, I know what I'm gonna design today. I have some frame of reference of multiple ideologies that I can bind to make whatever X new design is. And I think we need to know that, acknowledge it, and embrace it as designers. I just think, like, we will not, I personally, like, I don't actually really, you know, I copy nothing, but I steal the ideologies of everything. And I'm okay with that. And you have to kind of be okay with that, because we're designers, not artists. And this is an example, this is a great example of like a mood board, the type of mood board that we put together for a client. We kind of slam everything against the wall, and like, I might be looking at, you know, and I might be showing one of my young designers like, hey, you know, look at the spacing that's happening between here and here, right? And take that and think about that, and how does that ruminate in our design? It might be like the usage of color, but our references are all around us, and be okay with looking at those references and then taking them and figuring out how to stir the pot and make something new. This is my funny one for today. Own your own crazy. So, I don't know if I can read that. Maybe I can. So, I feel like I should read this, actually. So this is an email that I got a while ago. And the idea of this is know who you are, right? It's like know who you are as a designer a little bit. The email actually is from somebody's wife trying to get a job at my company. Like, they didn't write the email themselves, they actually had their wife write an email and send it in, and it tells me how awesome he is, and things like he's an incredibly hard worker, and he never complains. And he currently works 11 to 15-hour days. Very specific there, it's kind of strange. And now the email behind that, this is my crazy. This was my wife reading said email and writing a hilarious response, which did not get sent. I'm glad I blacked it out, because we are on YouTube. And so, the idea of hold on. All right, there we go. I think the idea here is that, like, just know who you are. Know who you are as a designer. That's the heart of that.
Hire that person.
We did not hire that person. I did not interview that person. If somebody's wife's going to write in like that, like I said, you need to own it. And I've always felt that way about it, and I'm okay. Yeah. So you're not going to try that? Don't. It doesn't work out. Solve problems, and I think it's more than just solve problems as a designer. Solve the really hard problems. Look for hard problems and solve those first. I think oftentimes we sit down at our desk and we try to do the easiest thing first. You know, maybe it's the login system that's the hardest thing for us to figure out. You know, maybe we know that that's going to be the sticking point where somebody's not going to be able to get into our system. whatever it is, like, look for those hard problems. In the example of the Tribune that I showed you before, the hardest problem is advertising. Where do we put the real estate for the advertising, and how does that work? And when we started, we developed wireframes and UX that basically solved that problem right off the bat, eased the minds of the ad department, and they said, okay, now make the journalism as crazy, the journalism side as crazy or as rich as you want it to be. And so trying to tackle those problems first usually builds a lot of, kind of a lot of buy-in. I was just going to show, we do a lot of work for Reebok, and I think they're another great example of somebody, again, a client level that has solved a really hard problem. Probably, I don't know the date, but Adidas came in and bought Reebok, gutted all of their senior management, and essentially left them with the scrap to pick up many years ago. It's probably 10 years ago or so. And Reebok solved the problem of what Adidas had done to them by saying, what's our core audience? Like, what do we have left that we own? What have we always owned? And it was fitness. And they came in and they built on the backs of the CrossFit market. And so that's one of these ideas where, like, I love that idea of, like, if you solve the hard problem first, like in their case, it's like, how do we come back? And how do we, like, you know, make everything right again? You know, they basically did that by axing all their ties with what they had and rebuilding as an e-com company and a CrossFit company. And it was pretty ingenious in retrospect. Encourage debate. So among your department, this is a hard thing to do. I think as a designer, this is really hard for, man, almost every designer I've ever worked with. Like, I think we all want to be, like, accepted, right? We want, like, our design and our art to be accepted, but I think the best designers in the world encourage debate among their teams and listen to what that debate is. You know, as a leader, my job is to facilitate that debate. I want to hear everyone's opinion on the team, and I want to hear why it's back there. And when you're asked your opinion as a designer, I'd like to tell all of you, like, give what you think, because that's how you make great design. I did write in here that, like, you can have a safe word too if you need to. So how do we facilitate positive debate? So we want to frame the problem or the questions that need to be answered in new ways. We want to get investment from the right people. We want to kind of set that framework about what you're trying to solve. You're going to want to encourage informed decision making. And this one's really, like, sorry, this came from, like, leadership stuff, but you want to share your view last. Like, as a leader, I share my view last. I let the rest of my team tell me what they think. Even though I always have an opinion, which is annoying. This is ABC, which for me is always be creating. Sometimes it's been always be crafting. I think as a designer, this is about having hobbies and having things that you're passionate about, that maybe relate to design, but are not directly, like, design work. In my role, I really look at websites all day long. That's mostly what I do. I design interfaces, and I design installation work, and I design a lot of websites. And so, like, for me, like, print design's kind of a hobby. It's like becomes a respite for everything. And I think this is kind of an example of, like, some different things and different work that has nothing to do with, like, digital design that we've created. And it shows that we actually have a really rad line of mugs that are coming out soon, and we're going to be sending to all of our clients, which I'm excited about, which some of our illustrators have been working on. And so, like, it's like looking at things that we don't normally do. Find tools to allow collaboration. All right, so anybody familiar with this tool? Anybody? One. Anybody else? This is Figma. So Figma is, it's kind of like if any of you use Adobe XD, if any of you use Sketch, if any of you use not Photoshop. It's pretty much a newer, more contemporary. Is anyone following, like, InVision's launch this week, like, of their new tool? Yeah. It looks like it's going to be cool, but I don't believe anything until January. So Figma has been our tool of choice as of late. What's cool about this is it's collaborative. So it's like Adobe XD or something like that, where all of my designers can go in and we can be working at once. And the funny part about this is, like, when we first started using this tool, look, I'm an old school Photoshop designer. I do my comps in Photoshop, so you guys can all laugh at me now. I laugh at myself on that. And essentially, I fought this a little bit when one of our designers brought this up. And I started using it as, like, revolutionized, like, the way that my team is designed and the way that we communicate, actually. So we all can be in here collaborating, building an interface. On something like the Tribune site that I was showing you, like, people were doing different pages and we could all see and share elements among everything and have, like, real-time collaboration. I felt like this was gonna be like Big Brother 1984 style, like me as the boss was gonna be like, you need to, like, design it this way. But honestly, I think it's made our entire team better. So get nerdy about knowing what tools are coming out, and that doesn't mean you have to try to convince your design teams to switch to them, but try them, learn them, and, like, just know your tools. Other tools we use, we love Slack, we love Google Docs, as you can see by this lovely Google presentation. I hate slides, but I use it anyway. Be a storyteller. So I think as a UX designer or UI designer, I think this is a great one for those people to glom onto. Don't think about, just like where everything is on a screen. Think about, how do I tell the story of the product that I'm trying to get to? What's my time? Oh, I'm running long. I better speed this up. So I'm not going to show you guys a video about story. All right, pick 2 of 3. This is like an agency adage, if you guys haven't heard this one. You can have good, fast, or cheap. And you have to pick 2 of those 3, and if you can't, you can't do it. This one is about relationships. You can have intelligent, emotionally stable, or good looking. You can't have all 3 of those. I think that was just funny. My thing as a designer is, I always say why. Why can't we have all of these things? So I've developed a production department who's really, really good at pushing back on client timelines so I can have more time to make good quality design for more money. And I think for you guys here, just realize that these are the 3 constraints that we have with any given project, and figure out which one you need, which one is the weakness, and then get people aligned and bring them along. The gentle art of starting over. Yes. This one is like the biggest. This is great for juniors. My junior designers, most people I know coming out of school, they do not know how to tear up their stuff and start over. Be okay with that, because again, we're doing design and not art. It has no personal reflection on yourself. I think back to, I have a good friend who has gone on to write all those Arby's, where's the meats commercials, right? You guys know those? They're super annoying. And he's like a big time creative director now. And I remember when he was young, watching him walk in, present scripts, and the CD basically standing in front of him and tearing those scripts up right in his face. Which is not what I would encourage any CD to do, ever. But what it did teach me is that that CD was trying in a very brash, aggressive way to teach Matthew that, hey, sometimes you just have to start over, even if it's good. Because the next iteration will be that much better, because all the good things you did in the first version will be in that iteration in some breathing life or other. So I talk about this one a lot with Starbucks, because we do a lot of work for Starbucks. Really quickly, I'll just jam through that. But one of the things we do is a channel for them called 1912 Pike, and maybe 3 months ago, basically they came to us and said, you know what, we're going to just completely kill that thing, and we're going to start it over as something completely different, but we're going to have all the content that you already did for the past 2 years in that thing. And my entire team was like, oh, they let out this giant sigh, right? You guys have basically just ruined everything we've been working on for 2 years. And I think we look, I tried to tell our team, hey, this is an opportunity to start over. Like, this is an opportunity to take all the things that we've done wrong and get them right this next time around. And that's really what iteration should be about. Study psychology, philosophy, and therapy. I need the last one right now. This is, I love this idea of, I think that this is my like Zen thing, is like everyone sits at a different point on the circle. This is like a really easy analogy for everyone to remember, is like when you're in a room and you're presenting something, like we're all at a different point on the circle. We're all coming into this with different norms and attitudes and things that we're thinking about and approaches. And so this is just like really quintessential to how we communicate and how we present design. Live for experience. Yeah, so money won't really make us happy, but living a full life will. This is again a project work. We recently did some work for Travel Oregon, and this thing was like super crazy. We had like 4 weeks to complete it, and everyone looked at it and was like, "No, we can't do this." It's like I'm not going to show the site right now. You guys can check it out. But it's a 360 VR project, and we had never done like any big time VR. You know, we had like this giant camera array building this thing. My team had no idea how to build like their own player. We basically built a player that ended up being better than what like Google had built when they did their 360 break. If anybody saw like the Bears Ears piece, you guys seen that? There's like a whole like really cool interactive piece that Google did for Bears Ears, National Monument. And essentially, I just loved this because even though it was like one of the hardest 4 weeks of my life, it was like absolutely an amazing experience. And that's a talking robotic fish. And you know, this job was like, it was okay for the money. We did okay on it, but it wasn't really about that. It was about learning and about growing as a team and a company. And so anytime you can take those opportunities, do. Say no. Your time is valuable. I don't think I need to go into a lot of detail on that one. I think this was a hard one for everyone to learn. This was my lesson to it. I started back to the crafting thing. I started a outerwear company 7, 8 years ago. And this was some of the work we did for it. I'm really proud of the work that I did for it, but I realized really quickly that like monetarily it wasn't gonna get anywhere, and we weren't gonna be able to have legs, and it was gonna take up too much time of my life, in my life, but it was a great experience, and the learning side of that was awesome. But eventually we had to pull the plug and say no. Create ritual. So, Rituals basically help create a support network. So like whatever you can do with your design teams, like try to create rituals around this. You know, a lot of people have, I personally have a ritual in like how I mood board. Like I know very well, like I know exactly how I'm gonna sit down and mood board. I know exactly how I'm gonna do like my design process and how it's gonna start. And I think it's really important, both on a micro and a macro level, to try and create that ritual in your life every day when you go in and design. Like for some people, it's like writing down a list of the things that you need to do each day. But figure out what those rituals that work for you are, or for your team, and execute on them. A well-designed ritual is fun, exciting, meaningful, and profitable. I think it's And so this is like a quick example of like, I just wanted to include in here 2 slides of like things that we do from a ritualistic standpoint of like, we always do drawings. We do a lot of stuff by hand. That actually that came from somebody's sketchbook. And then we always do a lot of like motion mood boarding. So we find a lot of like either samples that are motion, or we find things that move, even if it's a static thing that we're working on. We found that helps us think about how, in the end, how that site might move. So this is like this is kind of a go-to for me. So live in the present. If you're depressed, you're living in the past. If you're anxious, you're living in the future. And if you're at peace, you're living in the present. So I like that notion. It's a little more on the therapy side than it is on the design side, but that's cool. And this is like related to that. It's like, know where you are on the Gartner Hype Scale. If you guys have ever seen the Gartner Hype Scale, back to a couple projects ago there, that VR project. I talk about this a lot because I think VR is it's probably right there right now. It is like an inflated experience that like, everyone's like, oh yeah, let's go do some VR for our brand. That's totally gonna succeed. Maybe, I'm not so sure. But this is a great thing to remember when you're developing and when you're designing new work, is like, when you're creating, you're going really like, you want to be here, right? Like, you want to be creating the thing that stands the test of time. Like, try not to be creating up here, and definitely try not to be creating down here. And so it's one of those ideas and ideologies that like kind of bridge that narrow kind of band that I kind of equate with timelessness. Try to design in that zone. If it doesn't suck, it's not worth doing. So we recently completed some awesome projects for Adobe, and they won some awards this week. But you know, the best work that you do in your life, it starts out sucking usually. and I think that's okay. Like, I think like this idea of perseverance often yields the best results and the things that we end up being most proud of. And I think for us, like, this came in, like, the reason this project actually was great, it didn't really suck that much. The thing that sucked about it was like the organization. Like, they handed us like this white paper that was like this tall, and they said, organize this for us. And we said, what? How are we gonna organize this into something? And so that was the part to us that we all looked at and were like, this is gonna suck. But in the end, like, after you get done that hard work and you kind of earn that out, it's really, really fulfilling and satisfying. And I just think that's kind of a great lesson for everyone. And last, be grateful. You guys can follow me there. And let's talk. Let's do questions. I want to talk. Does anybody else want to talk?
So after you left Struck, however long ago, what did you miss the most immediately going to like Small Lakes? And is there still something that you miss from that?
I think initially I missed the teamwork. I missed having like a large support team around me to have discussions and to delve into the work and to challenge the work. So when it was two of us in a room, that was really hard. You know, you end up like building a social community around that. But I'm kind of anti like social network for that kind of stuff. Like, I'm not into Dribbble. I hate it, quite honestly, because I think it makes you a bad designer. Maybe not a bad designer, but like an overstimulated designer. Like, it makes it so you feel like you can't ever do anything that's as good as everything else that's out there. And that's really discouraging, I think, for a lot of people. And so for me, like, that feedback loop and that personal feedback loop, that one-on-one thing was like the thing that I was missing the most when I left. Yeah, I think, and for anyone here that's in a small team, like, the only thing you kind of can do is come to these kind of events, right? And like talk about your work and have that social system. But I would encourage you to do it that way rather than Dribbble, because Dribbble is like a beatdown for most designers, I feel like. Or a backstroking thing for a lot of people. I've noticed that like I've talked to my young designers about Dribbble a little bit, and they've kind of said like, well, I don't get any real feedback. It's kind of like walking into a critique when you're in art school and like them going, that's great, everybody's is great. Okay, so you're all dismissed. It seems ridiculous, right? Does that kind of answer? Yes. Yeah. Go for it.
So I went from working on an in-house, or for several years, on in-house brand and marketing teams, to working on in-house product team. And something I still struggle with, and something I've talked a lot about, been very vocal about, is with our industry putting so much focus on data, how do you balance data and creativity and emotion? And I wonder if you've encountered that with some clients, and how do you strike that balance, that recipe? balance versus the, well, you know, we need the data for X, Y, Z. So, topic.
That's a fantastic question, actually. I think we, as a designer, personally, I embrace it, but I equate myself to more designer and less artist most days. I think that's one way I head check myself. I say, like, my job is to do X with a client, and if that means figuring out a way to integrate their data to sell something better, to get someone through the sales funnel better, to, I kind of view that as a fun art form and a fun challenge. I don't know that I have any easy answers for that. I think for our team, when I think about it, that last project that I was talking about, the Adobe project, is a perfect example, because that's basically what they did. They handed us this like giant thing of data, and they said, here, you need to make this into like a graphical design type of thing. I think what you're talking about is more like, oh, we've got this Google Analytics information, and they want me to make X changes to our, our product. How do I do that? Can I ask you a question? Tell me a little bit about what you work on.
So right now, I'm an in-house team working on, it's an e-commerce marketplace, actually right across the street. And I'm not personally experiencing any issues with the data has to influence the design quite as much, but I think I'm just seeing it as a trend in the industry where the data has to influence the design, and there's less of the emotional, creative side that is influencing the design of the products that we're building.
I think, I guess I see the reverse problem, right? I see a lot of people telling me like, hey, here's a lot of data on something. I want you to do X with it. And I think in my position, a lot of people just ignore it. And I'm of the opposite mindset. Like, I try to find that happy medium, right? I think testing, honestly, like quantitative, qualitative testing, A/B testing, like those kinds of things speak louder than anything else if somebody's coming at you with data, right? So it's like trying to go back and maybe not solve it one way, solve it a multitude of ways, and then flip that on its head and say, well, which of these three pleasing designs performs the best, right? I think that's a good way to approach that problem. I think we also have an interesting culture right now where you've got designers who are starting to become like CEO level in companies. You just talk about like Airbnb and some of these other bigger companies, where you've got designers who are leading things, and I think they have a more fundamental understanding of that. And so you'll see, these chief creative officers or whatever you want to call them, and getting their ear to like actually help champion work that has great creative as well. I kind of like the challenge personally. I think it's interesting, but it's not always straightforward, and it's kind of like it adds one more layer to everything usually. And
along those lines, have you ever had to somehow objectively sell a design or to a client, basically taking the subjectivity of is this design good or not, and somehow make that objective. Like you said, let's take these three really good designs and which one works. Basically, that's trying to take the subjectivity around which one to choose and make it an objective. How have you done that, and how did you do that?
we tend to limit choice. As a designer, I mean, honestly, like I limit choice to what I would be happy and satisfied with at the end of the day, that hopefully meets the challenge. So a lot of design shops will go and they'll present 5 concepts for something. Like if you're presenting 5 concepts, like I feel like a design team needs a consensus on what they think is right for a client, and then what they think is going to perform for a client, and then like choose the best 2 that meet those criteria and push those across the desk. Don't push 5 across the desk and just let it all happen. And then also revisit, right? So So allow your clients to basically push something out there and then come back, use statistics and data to iterate on that too.
I was just gonna say, did they ever force you into saying, we're gonna A/B test these two? Or is it always such a blank slate and such a big change for them that it's not really that minor? That makes sense.
I think so. In most of our scenarios, honestly, I want our clients to A/B test things. Is that kind of what you're, like, I want that feedback loop because I think too much design is subjective. It's like a designer's personal heart poured onto a piece of paper, and it becomes like, you know, an ego thing. It becomes a thing about like somebody's personal agenda. And for me as a creative, and what I try to teach all of our team is that, like, you know, this is, design meets a business need and a solution, and yeah, you get to put your stamp on it, but ultimately, like, success is unfortunately oftentimes measured in dollars. Like, I hate to say that, but for our clients, that's how it kind of comes down to. Or clicks, or whatever you want to say, you know. Is that kind of?
Yeah.
Go for it.
You say that you're not a fan of visual, but you spend most of your day on the internet. Where do you find your inspiration?
Ah, that's a good question. Man, I'm really old school there.
Not on Dribble.
What's that?
Not on Dribble.
Not on Dribble, no. I actually do like, if you want to talk like that kind of like candy stuff, I do like awards, but I like it more for like the motion side of things these days. That's kind of what I look at. I look at a lot of motion work. So I look at a lot of reels, a lot of video work. I spend a lot of time on Vimeo, probably too much. I find more inspiration around that. I think design itself, like I find more like print work actually. Like I really like to go to a Barnes and Noble and look at magazines. I really like to go to like Powell's books and like sort through like old stuff. Like I'm very kind of archaic and old in that way. I think my younger designers, like, I feel like they have their inspiration from video games. Quite honestly. I mean, I think, you know, there's like, when you talk about like things that are pushing interface design and pushing the norms, it's like video gaming goes way farther than anything we do on the internet today. And it allows for like a connotation that's very different that we'll get. I think I'm really fascinated, like, and I think my whole team is fascinated by physical design and like how we bring digital into physical. And so some of our agenda is that I talk a lot about like the tactile side of what we do. Like, and I'm not talking like skeuomorphism. I'm talking like how do we get like a pleasing sensation when I press a button, right? It's like it's kind of esoteric, but like how do you know like, you know, when I press a key on here, like what does that feel like? Does that feel good? Like I want that same sensation in any of my digital design. Usually the thing that limits that is time. You can ask me. You can ask me? Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, you can.
okay, so this is kind of off subject, but I'm curious. What was your first job?
Like really my first job?
Yeah, like.
My actual first job was picking parts in a warehouse. I went to school for photography, so I was a photographer originally. Never actually practicing photographer. I went to school for, this is a funny story, photography, which where I went was an imaging science program, so most of us were being trained to all be like computer programmers for the NSA or the DIA or the CIA, actually. Many of my classmates went on to basically write remote sensing work, so they were like half coders, right? But had started in that business with a visual eye. So like a lot of us were like writing. If you think about the underlying code that lives in Photoshop that makes it do its thing, we were writing code to find tanks on maps, basically. That's what a lot of people in my program did. early on during Flash era, I learned how to code in Director and then in Flash, and so that kind of tailed me into being a Flash designer, which tailed me into being a graphic designer, which for a long time I both developed and designed, and probably 15 years ago, 12 years ago, I probably moved away and I just started just designing at that time.
What do you do for your ABC? Like, when you just want to do something,
I learn something usually. I approach a creative art that I don't know typically. So right now I just finished my basement. No, I mean that's a super practical thing, right? But I don't have any woodworking, or I didn't have any woodworking skills before I started. But I was like, that's a very practical example. I was like, I really need to know. I want to learn how to do this thing. There was a slide up there, I don't know if I showed it, but there's probably one of the most influential people that I've ever met in my life. He's the head of Specialized Bikes. I did an interview with him maybe 7 or 8 years ago as part of like the I Am Specialized series, and that guy blew my mind. He made me feel like a really bad man. like this guy could do anything. Like he knew how to like operate one of those old school like metal working things. I don't even know what you call it. Like the tin shaping stuff. He had built his entire house from scratch. He had built a exact like replica Shelby Cobra from scratch. And it just like blew my mind. Like this guy was such a Renaissance artist that any form he took on, he could make something amazing out of it. And that was really inspirational for me. I'm not close to achieving that. I'd love to be. And I think it's something, it gives us all something to aspire for. It's like learn a new creative art. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be like, it could be hand lettering, it could be crafting, I don't know, these like fuzzy balloon animal things. My daughter's been doing those lately, like with the eyeballs on them, and you turn the yarn inside out of it. But it's cool, like I was like, how do you do that? Show me how to do that. I think that we're always looking for like new things that might interest us and like taking the practical things around us and finding them. Probably about 4 years back when we started the content division at We Like Small, I can see that like I had zero knowledge of how to, not zero knowledge, but I had very little knowledge of how to operate a professional Hollywood camera. And through the course of that next year, I taught myself how to do everything on like Reds and Aris and like these very sophisticated camera systems and run gimbals and like what all of it meant. And it was really satisfying because it was about learning. It's not really, and I think that's what's been great about this career is like, I get to learn constantly. And it might not always be design, but it's related to, all of those visual arts relate, I think.
Did you always feel like you were meant to be like in a lead position? Or be like as you were evolving into this from marketing to design, did you always feel like this was just something that would come naturally, or?
I was entrepreneurial really young, in the sense that like, if anybody hasn't listened to How I Built This, the podcast How I Built This, like that is the most inspirational thing that I have to date. Like for me as a business owner now, it's like a crash course in like how to run a company. It's awesome. It's How I Built This is the podcast, and NPR puts it on. But that's a tough question. I don't know that I ever thought much about it, quite honestly. I don't even think I thought much about starting a company. I just wanted to make stuff. Our tagline right now is belief in the making, which like I sweated that thing for a while. And I think it speaks very much to the heart of who I am. I don't know that like, I've always felt like I could quit this and start like building houses tomorrow and I'll be successful at it because if I'm passionate about it, it doesn't really matter. And I think that's the hard. I think finding what that thing is that you're passionate about, like I was lucky to do that really young, and I learned very quickly that it was about, for me, it's about visual and it's about technical. And it's about where those 2 points converge, I think. As you can tell, public speaking is not necessarily
I'm curious, I come from the sexy, it's fast, it's award, it's ego, it's sleeping on your desk, you know, I mean,
It's not sleeping
years
on
of
your
it.
desk.
And then I've been in-house, and in-house suddenly there was this strong connection to not only what we created, but now how do users interact with it, how do we improve it, and that lit something up inside of me. So I stayed in-house, or that's where I landed. And every now and again I look over the wall and I go, oh, what they're doing is so sexy and so fun, even just looking at your reel or whatnot. And I'm curious, like I'm always kind of like vacillating between the two. In your experience building an agency, when you create a project and you create your parameters around here's my budget, here's my constraints, and here's what we're going to do creatively to balance it within it, do you ever continue to have a relationship with the client where they come back and they go, it didn't perform the way we want it to, can we tweak it? Do you get to have that in the way you build your agency?
We do get to that. In fact, we're doing the project right now. One of the biggest projects in-house right now is we do a lot of work with Starbucks and Adobe and Reebok, but Starbucks and Adobe in particular have projects running right now like this. So Starbucks, that thing that I went very quickly through it, but we have iterated and created a completely new blog system based on what they had already done. And so that was that exact case. It was an iteration. For Adobe right now, which is exciting, and this is not launched, this is not live, so this is insider information. They had about 150 blogs, or they have about 150 blogs currently. We're taking that and culling it down to one platform, and our job is to like continue to roll out advancements to that platform. So it's like a software-esque type thing, medium-esque in a way, issue-based. But I don't know that I'm I think we're an exception in the agency world. Like I think we're very lucky, and maybe it's because we're focused only on digital. I'm trying to think about other agencies that I talk to. Like I know the guys at Instrument pretty well, and I think those guys get to iterate fairly often. And I'll say, like, I think our team finds it satisfying because it's a different kind of challenge. It is fun to jump from sexy thing to sexy thing, but at the same time, like, it's also like, just like in the other example there, it's like pretty shallow. And so I like relish in the things where we get to kind of do both. So.
One more follow-up.
Go for it.
I've been watching your agency off and on, like curious about it. It's the first time I've seen you, so it's great to hear you talk.
I'm shy.
So it's interesting that you guys, I love that you're interested in storytelling. Like that's the meat of so much of what we do when we're doing the strategy. I'm seeing that you're moving more toward video as you're building out your team, as you're growing. Is that like the future of your agency and how you continue to tell your stories?
I see it as one part of what we do, and I look at it as controlling the digital voice of a brand and being able to have a uniform voice in that. I don't necessarily look at it as like, oh, I just want to like move into storytelling and video content. We started it out of trying to have an effect for, I guess we'd done a little bit before this, but really the heart of it when we said, yeah, we're going for this is when we sat down with a startup out in California and they make like nano satellites. And they needed a bunch of photography and cinematography work done for them. And we kind of said like, they came to us for a website, but we said, you don't have anything for a website, like what are we gonna do? And I didn't want to produce stock imagery. I don't want to go pull a bunch of stock down. Like I want to produce the original content. You guys are doing something no one else in the world is doing. Like, let's tell your story. And I think that was when in my mind it clicked, like, I don't want this to just be something we hire out when we need it. I want it to be something that is like tied to the creative process and tied to what happens on the web. Because if you're just, I think a lot of digital is shallow because it doesn't have that aspect to it, and it doesn't have, just doesn't have a storytelling side to it. It's like, we just throw a thing out there and like, hey, I hope everybody's gonna like check out my product. It's like, that's a tough sell. The best the best, most successful internet companies I think out there right now have pretty deep stories outside of maybe Facebook. I don't know. Like I'm thinking about like Airbnb, right? It's like I love what Airbnb's done from a product standpoint, and like if you hear their story, it goes really deep, and like how they came about building Airbnb the way they did is fascinating. So. Any other questions? All right. Thanks for your time, guys.